The Soviet Union and communist governments in general are often associated with developing cults of personality surrounding notable leaders. Mao, Kim Il-sung, Nicolae Ceausescu are all prominent examples of these. But we here at the Cold War feel it is important to note that cults of personality are not just limited to left-wing communist-style governments, but can form around any form of government. That's why today we are going to go over one of the most famous and prominent cults to develop in the 20th century, and while it is focused on a communist leader, what I would encourage everyone to do is compare the points raised and compare them to any leader of your choice, regardless of political affiliation, to see how they measure up. I'm your host David, and today we are examining Stalin's cult of personality. This is the Cold War. Joseph Djugashvili is a name that some of you people will know right away, but which fewer of you will have any sort of reaction to. That's because Joseph Djugashvili, born 1878 in Gori, Georgia, where he spent his childhood before becoming a failed seminarian, and then a failed meteorologist before becoming a successful bank robber, and then a revolutionary, took on a different name. A name that almost everyone on Earth has heard, Joseph Stalin. Stalin, who chose his moniker, translated as Man of Steel, is so well known because under his tenure as leader of the USSR, millions of people were murdered and millions more faced deportation, imprisonment, and torture for imagined crimes, often with no actual crime having been committed, and with only the thinnest pretense of due process. And yet, for some people, many of whom seem to haunt the comment sections of our videos, the name Stalin invokes admiration and respect. Well, why is this? Why, after so many decades and the crimes of Stalinism being laid bare for the world to see, is Stalin still held in high regard in some political circles and even offered a degree of rehabilitation in Russia and his native Georgia? The why is what we want to talk about today, the cult of personality that over 3 decades Stalin built up to help capture the soul of a nation he helped shape through violence and brutality. Stalin's model would become an example by which many other Cold War leaders would follow, and a model that has outlasted the Cold War and is still being followed to this day. So come with us as we explore the cult of personality of one of the most brutal tyrants in human history. So as we start, I want to reiterate this is not a biography of Stalin. If you want that, go read Kotkin. This video's primary focus is examining how the Stalin cult of personality came to be and persisted throughout Stalin's life and even after his death. Another thing I want to put up front is the crimes of Stalinism are undeniable, and for everyone who is interested, we have included links in the description to the Memorial Foundation databases, which show both the list of victims of the Stalin terror and the execution orders signed by Stalin himself and his top lieutenants. If you have issues with this, you may want to stop watching now and go find something else to watch. Now, let's start by defining what a cult of personality entails. The official agreed upon definition, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, is, quote, a deliberately created system of art, symbolism, and ritual centered on the institutionalized quasi-religious glorification of a specific individual. Of course, cults of personality vary widely in their practices and geographies, meaning no two are exactly alike, yet as the American Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart said, I know it when I see it. For some, the cult of personality is the end goal of their regime, total veneration by their people. For Stalin, the cult of personality was a tool, one of many that he used in his true goal, which was absolute power over the USSR. Stalin's path towards the cult of personality followed along 3 broad lines which have been imitated by his successors. First, there was the creation of a carefully curated public image. This both legitimized Stalin as the true heir and leader of the revolution, while also placing him at the center of the revolutionary struggle. Second, the cult of personality coincided with the destruction of the bonds of society, using state-sponsored terror and massive economic disruption, while also creating an amorphous enemy class. Even as this was happening, all information channels were flooded with praise for the leader. Every success is directly related to him, every failure the result of saboteurs, wreckers, and those people. And who were those people, the amorphous enemy? Well, it varied depending on time and location, but included, for example, Western socialists, petty bourgeoisie, kulaks, Jews, Volga Germans, Crimean Tatars, and so on. enemies could always be found, and the resources of the state and society mobilized against them. Finally, the cult of personality ties the leader to national pride. Stalin was initially placed at the center of the worldwide revolutionary struggle, but that shifted over time, especially after the Second World War, as he became an outspoken Russian chauvinist and even proto-imperialist. As illustrated by Dr. Sergei Radchenko, Stalin even pushed for the USSR to be awarded North African colonies at Potsdam. While much of this national chauvinism was Stalin taking advantage of the triumph of the Second World War, some historians, like Radchenko and Vladislav Zubok, argue Stalin was more comfortable in the mindset of great power politics, and he made this a part of his public image. Less the great revolutionary and more the great leader. Okay, so the starting point for Stalin's cult of personality came during his early efforts to seize power. Stalin had long been an associate of the revolutionary activities in the Russian Empire, but as an enforcer, a bomber, and a bank robber, he was a foot soldier and a thug who did not mix well with urbane intellectuals such as Lenin and Trotsky. Nevertheless, Lenin recognized that Stalin did have his uses, and he was made Minister for Minorities, a fairly sizable job when you consider the huge diversity within the Russian Empire. He was subsequently demoted to General Secretary of the Communist Party, an administrative position, but one he used effectively to control access to Lenin and build up his own base of support. After Lenin's death, Stalin moved rapidly to position himself as successor. This came in two prongs: one, elevating Lenin to near sainthood, and two, tying himself to Lenin. That's why to this day Lenin's embalmed and shrinking corpse inhabits a mausoleum in Red Square rather than being buried as he and his family wanted. Stalin needed Lenin as a symbol of the revolution to tie himself to. Stalin's path to power was not straightforward though, as historian Ian Crenshaw noted. Quote, "A Stalin cult had to be built carefully. This was not just because the man himself was so physically unpossessing, diminutive and squat, his face dominated by a big walrus mustache and heavily pitted from smallpox, or that he was a secretive, intensely private individual who spoke in a quiet, undemonstrative voice, his Russian couched in a strong Georgian accent that never left him. The real problem was the giant shadow of Lenin. Stalin could not be seen to be usurping the legendary image of the great Bolshevik hero and leader of the revolution, so at first Stalin tread cautiously." Stalin bid his time and by 1929 had ensured his main rival Trotsky was in exile and that his own allies held senior posts in government. Under his direction, Soviet propaganda emphasized Stalin's connection with Lenin, but also Stalin's modesty and demure lifestyle. Stalin's public image was one of a wise and subtle leader who lived in a dacha outside of Moscow and only worked in the grand palaces of the Tsars. So, while it's well known now that Stalin partook of all sorts of luxuries afforded to the highest members of the party, his public image minimized this. And public image was something Stalin worked hard to control. Throughout the late 1920s, Stalin maneuvered his allies into key positions in the Soviet artistic guilds, and by 1934 ensured that those guilds moved to eliminate abstract and experimental art and replace it with socialist realism. Socialist realism had four key objectives. 1. Be proletarian, art relevant to the workers and understandable to them. 2. Typical scenes of everyday life of the people. 3. Realistic, in the representational sense anyway. And 4. Partisan, supportive of the aims of the state and the party. In other words, simple literal art that even the most illiterate person could understand the surface meaning of. Rapidly though, Stalin was placed at the center of many of these artistic works, and Lenin was gradually moved to a supporting role in new propaganda with Stalin taking center stage. The Communist Party of Marxist-Leninism even became the Communist Party of Lenin and Stalin. The expansion of Stalin's public image and closeness to Lenin coincided with waves of revolutionary terror, beginning with land redistribution, which rapidly evolved into a purge of the nation's wealthiest and most industrious farmers, the kulaks. Although it's important to note kulak is a slang term for wealthy peasant, it was never a defined class of people in pre-revolutionary Russia. Yet Stalin and his supporters communicated constantly to the Soviet people that many of their misfortunes came from the kulaks hoarding grain and resources, that they were living off the hard labor of the less well-off peasants. This led to both official but also vigilante terror and denouncements against the kulaks. As Stalin consolidated power, he moved effectively to destroy the ability of any group of people to organize against him. The Great Terror reached its peak between 1933 and 1938, but had been building even before then. Stalin, despite personally ordering the executions, let the head of the secret police, Nikolai Yezhov, organize and spearhead the executions. So even as society was broken and brutalized, people would say, "Oh, if only Comrade Stalin knew what Yezhov is doing." The terror served to break any ability of society to organize against the government, and therefore Stalin, but also served to break the trust between people, even families, as denouncements came from everywhere. During the fall of the USSR, one lawyer would remark, "We cannot put those responsible for the terror on trial even if they're still alive, because we would all be on trial." Very few people resisted, fewer still survived any act of defiance. Yet even as people disappeared into the gulags and basements of NKVD offices, official propaganda over and over emphasized the infallibility of Stalin. The lionized public image, combined with Stalin only interacting with people outside of his ruling circle in carefully stage-managed events, built him up high and higher in people's estimation. Stalin, never the Machiavellian, also knew how to give the people concessions. Yezhov, Stalin's hatchet man and the murderer of so many thousands, was himself executed. His association with Stalin was erased, and he was even removed from photographs. And this was not an unusual action. Stalin's inner circle and high government officials were not spared from the climate of distrust and paranoia which Stalin cultivated. Today's best people for the job are tomorrow's incompetents. Stalin demanded absolute loyalty, and he pitted the members of his circle against one another, driving them to ever greater lengths of sycophancy to show their loyalty. Vyacheslav Molotov was forced to stand by as his wife was sent to the Gulag, Lazar Kaganovich was forced to stand by as his own brother was condemned to execution, and Nikita Khrushchev, who by day was the most powerful man in Moscow, spent his evenings dancing for Stalin's amusement. In his memoirs, Khrushchev would write, "When Stalin said dance, a smart man would dance." The insidiousness of a cult of personality is that for it to exist, people all across society can have no agency of action or association. They cannot question the motives or ideas of the person at the center of the cult. Thus it was under Stalin, thus it remains today. Even as Stalin murdered and imprisoned millions, he set out to revise Russian history and place himself at the center of it. He authored a book in 1938, History of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, Bolsheviks, which gave a very selective view of the history of the party, strongly emphasizing the role that he himself had played, downplaying the role of many, many other Bolsheviks. Now, some of you will have noted that I said Russian rather than Soviet history. Stalin, whatever his faults, was a keen observer of how to control people, and patriotism, along with imperial nostalgia, were powerful tools. During the Second World War, Stalin cynically appealed not to the defense of communism or the party of Lenin and Stalin, but to the Rodina, the sacred motherland. Many professors of history and artists were released from the prison camps and set to work creating a glorious national narrative of Russian civilization. Naturally, communism was incorporated as the destiny of all mankind, but where Lenin had once sought to erase national and ethnic identities, Stalin used nationalism to motivate the people. His nationalistic outlook did not end after the war, however. The ethnic Georgian openly embraced Russian imperialism and credited the Russian rather than the Soviet peoples with victory in the Second World War, christened the Great Patriotic War, itself an ode to the Patriotic War during Napoleon's invasion. Stalin rehabilitated many of the Tsars, such as Peter the Great, having them held up as great men of their time, and of course putting himself within the pantheon of great men of history. Stalin died rather suddenly in 1953, in a pool of his own urine by the way, but his ghost would continue to haunt the USSR, its successor states, and the rest of the world, even up to this day. One place where this is readily apparent is the reaction to Khrushchev's so-called 1956 secret speech, where he denounced the crimes of Stalin. This speech had serious repercussions both within the USSR and without. Internally, many people, even those who had witnessed Stalin's brutality, simply refused to believe it and instead attacked Khrushchev as a revisionist. This would partially contribute to Khrushchev's fall from power in 1964. Internationally, the speech was met with anger, especially from Stalin's contemporaries, such as China's Mao Zedong. Although there were multiple other factors that led to the Sino-Soviet split, Khrushchev's speech was one of the things that personally alienated Khrushchev from the Chinese leadership, who saw only the great man image that Stalin had projected and never had to dance for the amusement of the vozhd. Stalin never seemed to revel in his cult of personality, at least not as historians can ascertain, but he did encourage it, likely because he saw it as a tool to ensure continuing power, and in this he succeeded. Every plan and whim that Stalin had was enacted, and during his tenure, he did transform an agrarian state into a world superpower. So, was all of the blood worth it? Put simply, no, it was not. The strength of cults of personality is that they erode the value of individual human lives, and instead celebrate only the person at the cult's center, making that person indistinguishable from the nation. Yet cults rarely last more than a human lifetime. There are some notable exceptions, like North Korea, but that's for very specific reasons. In the case of Stalin, why his cult has continued to persist is partially due to the myth that was cultivated around him, and partially due to the trauma he inflicted. Victims often search for meaning in their experience, even though there is usually none. When one looks objectively, by sweeping away the propaganda and the mythos, they see only a short, ugly, brutal man who cared little for anyone other than himself, and cared not at all for the welfare of the people he supposedly led. Stalin's cult and mythology is one of the many ghosts of the Cold War that haunts us to this day, but it can and should be used as not only a warning, but as a benchmark. Having watched this far, I'm hopeful that some of you may take some of this information we have given and use this history to honestly scrutinize your own public figures, both political and social, to see how they compare to one of the most brutal cults of personality of all time. We hope you've enjoyed this episode, and to make sure you don't miss our future work, please make sure you subscribe to our channel and have pressed the bell button, which is currently rewriting the history books to ensure that future generations are aware of its greatness and not any of the other terrible things it needed to do to rise to power. Please consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/thecoldwar or through YouTube membership. We can be reached via email at thecoldwarchannel@gmail.com. This is the Cold War Channel, and as we think about the Cold War, please remember that history is shades of gray and rarely black and white.